Hey there, you're watching the Jessa Channel on YouTube. I'm Jessa, and today I am here with a special surprise for you. This is an interview with Smartbluecat, also known as Gary, who is the creator of Inigo, who has been Mala's companion throughout Season 2, and now as we head into Season 3. Inigo is a huge success. He was named Gamespot's Mod of the Year award. So there's a lot of questions that we have to ask Gary. I went to the folks over at Reddit as well to gather questions. So feel free to sit back and enjoy this interview. And then, at the end of the interview, make sure to click on the link to go straight to episode 1 of Mala, Inigo, and Joran's adventures in Skyrim. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Jessa. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Inigo is, amazingly, your first mod. Where did you get the idea for him?
I'm afraid I lost my voice recently while doing some recording, so I'm sorry if I sound a little bit croaky at the moment. Anyway, Inigo started as quite a nebulous goal. I wondered if it was possible to create a follower that felt more like a person than those I'd played with before, and I wondered how much of that could be done just through character and dialogue. The only locked-in ideas I had in the beginning were that I wanted him to have depth and consistency. Consistency is something I think that a lot of NPCs in games generally lack. I also knew that personally I would prefer to hang around with someone who wasn't naive, someone who'd lived a little and had the scars to prove it. But at the same time, I didn't want to create a character that was completely jaded. I wanted them to still have a sense of wonder about the world, because I think that's a really nice thing to be around.
I imagine that what puts so many off from creating mods of this scope, at least what puts me off from creating a mod of this scope, is learning the creation kit. But not only did you learn the creation kit, but you programmed Inigo more deeply than many other mods. I'm referring to how he will comment on the weather, your inventory, your location, among other things. How did you learn to do that in the creation kit? And what advice or resources would you recommend to a new modder?
I'm really not sure I'm the person that anybody should be coming to for advice in the creation kit. I'm not a master, by a long shot. And I mainly just learn by hitting things and noting down what happens. If you've got an internet connection, you've got a lot of resources at hand which are very, very useful. The Nexus, the forums on there can be very helpful. Google and YouTube are your friends. The creation kit wiki is detailed in most cases. On the Nexus in particular, there are lots of people who are quite happy to help out if they can. There was one guide that helped me a lot, and that was the Deck 16 series called Making a Unique Voiced Follower in Skyrim. You can Google it, it's still there, I think. Early on, that helped me quite a bit, but fairly soon I was running into problems that seemed no one had any answers for. Which is very common, we're all trying to make something that's different. We're all going to have unique issues. So trial and error is something that I think every modder has to get used to. And that's how I discovered most of what I know. So, I just try to play to my strengths, which are all outside of modding. And I try to use the little I do know as creatively as I possibly can. And I just keep learning as well. That would be my advice to anyone wanting to get into this. Get stuck in, get frustrated, get annoyed. But just keep learning and try to have some fun, because when something you've been tearing your hair out over for weeks suddenly works, it feels fantastic.
Did you have a moment or two when learning the creation kit that you felt overwhelmed? Or was the process easier than you imagined? Did you have any help at any point in the creation of Inigo, or was it a solo experience?
I still feel overwhelmed almost every time I boot it up. I think it's funny that people often ask me to implement this or that as if it's the simplest thing in the world because I made Inigo, as if I just need to hit Control F to add a feature they've decided should be in the game. It doesn't work like that. Really, there's no difference between people who mod games and gamers, other than modders sit down and try and work this stuff out. So I think most of us probably feel overwhelmed at some stage, especially in the beginning. When you start out, it's all very overwhelming. At least it was to me. I created Inigo alone. But recently I've had a bit of help with a couple of things in the next version. There's a talented guy known as Vamian on the Nexus forums who's done some coding work on version 2.0, getting him off the vanilla follower system and handling the code behind a new spell I really wanted to implement and a few other bits and bobs. I wouldn't have had the foggiest idea where to begin with something like getting him off the vanilla system. So when Vamian, who's far more experienced than I am at coding, kindly offered his help, I took it knowing it would allow me more control over Inigo's behaviour and so on. But mainly it's all me. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to my personal projects, so it's very rare that anyone else is involved. And if they are, they're always credited. But yeah, personally, I still feel overwhelmed a lot of the time. And now I know a bit more about how it all works, I'm even more amazed by what other people create. It's really inspirational. Some of the work out there is just astounding.
Inigo is voiced amazingly, absolutely amazingly, by you. And from what I understand, though, you're Scottish, if I'm not mistaken. But as we can hear, this is definitely not in Inigo's voice. How did you come up with his voice? Do you have any voice training? What equipment did you use? I understand that you also do music, which we'll talk about later, but I'm curious about what equipment you have in your studio that may have helped you get such a great sound with Inigo's voice.
I honestly can't remember exactly where the voice came from originally. It may have grown out of a number of bad impressions before it became its own thing. I previously tried it in a few smaller projects over the years for fun, but I think it was waiting for Inigo to come along. It's really his voice now. I actually don't have a studio or a particularly great microphone. I don't have any training in acting or anything like that, but I do have a lot of experience recording music at home with very limited resources. So maybe that helps. As far as equipment goes, I currently use a very old AKG condenser mic, probably worth about 50 quid, and I record and mix using Adobe Audition. If I released Inigo with his voice files as they sound when I first record them, I think players would notice a huge difference. They're terrible. They're very noisy and full of clicks and pops and horrible artifacts that all need to be cleaned out manually, and that is the most laborious part of the entire process. I'm really glad that people think he sounds okay, but some lines in the mod are far cleaner than others, mainly due to how much was going on outside my flat at the time of recording. With each update, I plan to go back and re-record some of the worst offenders. So basically, there's no fancy studio or equipment, but I try to do the best I can with what I have.
Inigo is also a fully fleshed out character with a rich backstory. Are there any similarities to your own life, or did you create everything about Inigo's backstory just out of your imagination?
There are a few general similarities, I suppose, but mostly he's a work of fiction. I've never had a drug problem, I have a sister, not a brother, and my family are all doing fine, unlike poor Inigo's. I have vitiligo. That's patches of skin where no pigment appears, and that certainly had some bearing on the white marks you see on his face. We're both quite aesthetically sensitive. We both love a good story and the rain, but other than that, we're quite different. I shave more than he does, and he's hairier than I am, for one thing.
In that vein, I wonder what other character exploration you may have done. Theater, or role play, or writing?
I've never done theatre, but I do a fair amount of writing. I've written short stories and songs and scripts. I rarely roleplay when I play games, though. I mean, I think there are probably a few exceptions when a role is thrust upon you. You can't help but get involved in that character's story. I've tried playing certain types of characters before that are less like me, and I always end up doing what I would do anyway. I'm rubbish at roleplaying. I love games like Fallout and Skyrim for many of the same reasons that roleplayers do, though. They let me be me within a new space, in the same way they let other people take on a completely new persona in a new space. It's one of the best things about these types of games. Every experience is valid.
From beginning to end, how long did it take for you to create Inigo? For example, how many hours per day or per week did you spend on the project?
Well, the end isn't in sight yet. It's been an embarrassing amount of time so far. I started working on Inigo over a year ago, and back then I'd spend a few hours a night on him every day. But as he developed, I worked on him more and more, and he soon began to soak up most of my free time. I regularly go through stages where I do 8 or more hours a day on him. Much of that is recording and testing and tweaking and re-recording. There really isn't a day that goes by where I don't do something on Inigo.
Inigo has completely opened up my Skyrim Let's Play. He and Mala are quite the team together. And I actually tried a couple of other companion mods, but I found that they were either disruptive or they didn't really play off of Mala and ended up being sort of a background noise, if you will. But Inigo has actually brought Mala's personality more to the floor. They play off of each other. It's fantastic. So I'm curious, do you still play Skyrim? And if so, is Inigo your companion? And if he is your companion, who's your main character that Inigo is accompanying? And have you experienced some of what I've explained about Inigo actually helping your main character become a better character?
That's really great to hear. I'm glad Inigo and Mala get on with each other. Yeah, that was always the hope, that he'd accommodate most playstyles and somehow maybe also strengthen the player's character, barring his questionable backstory with the player, which is a tale of deception, guilt, and redemption that can be believed or put down to skooma-addled madness, of course. Yeah, he does, when the moons align, make me feel more a part of the world. I think there's a long way to go on that one, but I'm happy that it does occasionally happen. I do play Skyrim, and Inigo is my follower. That's really the reason I made him. As for who I play, I try to exhaust everything in an Elder Scrolls game. I'm a completionist. I'll join every faction and replay certain sections to see how they play it differently. I always tend to end up as a sneaky archer character no matter what I do, though. And I usually play as an Argonian, purely for practical reasons. Being able to breathe underwater is very useful. For the last year, though, every time I boot up Skyrim, it's really an Inigo testing session. I now play as various characters with various skills, just to see how he's performing, to check that lines are firing correctly and so on. But yeah, he's my follower. That's another reason that I made his voice so different from my own. I couldn't bear spending this much time with someone who sounds exactly like me. It'd just be far too weird.
So many of the players are long-term Elder Scrolls fans. But Skyrim is the first game I played for more than a short time. I did dabble with Morrowind and Oblivion, but they didn't really catch me as much as Skyrim has, and I adore Skyrim. Are you a long-term Elder Scrolls fan? Is Skyrim your first game? If not, which was your first game, and are you still playing those games? Morrowind or Oblivion or any of those games?
I've never played any of the games before Morrowind, but I've been through Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. And I enjoy all three for slightly different reasons. I only currently play Skyrim at the moment because that's the game I'm working on. I did recently install Oblivion again though, so hopefully I'll get some time to revisit Cyrodiil soon. That was the first Elder Scrolls game I got completely lost in. Morrowind is undeniably fantastic and genre-defining, but Oblivion has some of my favourite story moments. The faction quest lines in that game are just superbly paced and genuinely interesting. Skyrim is absolutely amazing, but I think as far as those quest lines go, they're over far too quickly. Whereas in Oblivion, you really got a sense that you were climbing the ranks.
How much of the lore are you familiar with? There are some people who are very familiar with the lore and know all of it backwards and forwards, and you had to have some experience with some of the lore, at least some of the world, in order to build Inigo and make his backstory and make what he says in the world fit in. So, you know, lore-wise, is that a big interest for you in the Elder Scrolls world?
I wasn't really hugely into the Elder Scrolls lore before making Inigo. I enjoyed what lore I'd come across, but I didn't actively pursue it. I was very passive about it. As soon as I made Inigo, though, as soon as I had him sitting in a cell before I did any writing or anything else, I began to research the Khajiit, just to make sure that he didn't directly contradict any of the lore that Bethesda had put in place. So, I mean, I did want to make him as lore-friendly as possible, but I also wanted to bring my own ideas to the table. And learning the lore was the only way to do that. So yeah, I've got much of the official lore saved on disk for reference. And in the end, I think I've got something that never really contradicts the lore, but it certainly tests people's expectations of what the canon ideas are. There's no reason I found yet why Inigo can't exist in the world that Bethesda have created, even though he's very unique, you know, intentionally so. I often hear that Inigo is not lore-friendly because he doesn't talk about himself in the third person like most Khajiit. His colouring has also been deemed not lore-friendly by a small but very vocal group. As far as his voice goes, speech is cultural, not racial. All that stuff is learnt behaviour. To state otherwise completely flies in the face of what we know about how people adapt and learn based on their environment and culture. Race doesn't have any bearing on either the speech pattern someone uses, the language they speak. Race has got nothing to do with any of that in any universe. It would make far less sense, that Inigo would talk in the third person, given the information that's provided on his past. As for his colouring, there are a few handy gaps in Khajiit lore that I abuse to help tell the story I want to tell, but all that stuff really kicks off in version 2.0, which is a massive info dump. The player learns a lot about Inigo's past, and a few things that they possibly think they know are maybe brought into question.
Elder Scrolls Online has come out recently. Will we be able to see Inigo in Elder Scrolls Online? Are you playing it?
I'm interested in it, and I know a few people that play, but I just don't have the time at the moment. For the same reasons, I'm afraid Inigo won't be appearing anywhere else other than Skyrim. There just aren't enough hours in the day.
You must be bombarded with messages to make another mod or to do this or that with Inigo. How are you handling the fame your purple Khajiit has caused you?
It's bizarre, really strange. In the past, I've had a bit of exposure for my other art, but never anything like this. Most of the time, though, people are really lovely about Inigo, and they just want to say hello. And the community that I've amassed around him are just fantastic. They're a great bunch. As well as being the best looking and most intelligent fan base in the world, obviously, they are also incredibly kind. And many of them spend a lot of time sorting out other people's issues on his page, and I really can't thank those people enough. They save me the trouble of typing out the same answers again and again, and they give me more time to work on Inigo. On the subject of requests and ideas offered for Inigo, yeah, there are a lot. It can be frustrating. It's completely understandable, given what is out there on Inigo so far. But I have a nearly endless list of things I want to apply, and a full story that's been planned for quite a while now, and that's what I'll be focusing on. I think there's a misconception sometimes that if something isn't in a mod, that the author hasn't thought of it, when really in a lot of cases it's just that they haven't had the time to implement it, or there's a good reason why it's not in there that may not be apparent to players at the time, especially when a mod is in its early stages. The author is generally going to be looking at a much bigger picture than the audience could ever hope to. Most of the time, I get told to add things that will either directly undermine where Inigo's heading or undermine aspects of his character that are in there for a very good reason. So like I say, it's understandable, but yeah, it can be frustrating, because if I started giving away absolute reasons why X, Y, and Z can't be in the mod, then I'm kind of ruining future moments of the story. Not all opinions are invalid though, and there have certainly been a few that have changed aspects in the next update. Because of player input, I've given Inigo his own custom eyes, I've adjusted Mr. Dragonfly's centre of gravity for easier shelf placement, and now there's a way to get into Inigo's cell without picking the lock, which is something I considered briefly and then disregarded until a number of people requested it. I'm just extremely happy and surprised that anyone cares enough to comment at all. I almost didn't release Inigo to the public. I just made him for me, so his success has been completely unexpected. It's been lovely seeing how people have embraced him.
So tell us a little more about Inigo for those who have not met him yet. What makes him tick? What are some of his passions? What really irritates him? Now, of course, I don't want you to reveal too much because for those who haven't played him yet, he does include a lot of that in the game. But perhaps something that we, even those of us who play with him, wouldn't know. Give us a couple of Inigo secrets.
Inigo is a bluish-purple Khajiit with a unique and very dark past that may or may not involve the player. He's fearless and loyal and a crack shot with a bow. Despite what he's been through, he tends to see the funny side in most situations. He's a bit unhinged mentally, and he'd willingly die for you in an instant. He loves spiders, killing them anyway. He hates the undead, and he despises racism and prejudice of any kind. Something I can tell you that no one else knows yet. He's terrified of snakes. His worst nightmare would be being trapped in a snake pit in the middle of a Draugr crypt.
If Inigo were able to live in our world, in this time, How do you think he'd end up? Do you think he'd end up married with kids, perhaps a politician or a CEO, maybe working at the local gas station?
That's a great question. Well, I suppose it would depend on what mental state he was in. If everything was going okay, he'd probably be in the forces. Maybe he'd be a police officer or fireman. I think he'd be a good fireman. Or a soldier. If his life hadn't turned out well, he'd be a part-time security guard in a shopping mall or something with a bit of a drink problem and an expanding waistline. He'd go home, feed Mr. Goldfish, and fall asleep watching Frozen Planet.
Also, Gary, you can see from your YouTube channel that you're also a musician. And I'm curious, would you play us perhaps a little snippet of one of your pieces?
If you want to hear any of my music or watch some of my animation, feel free to swing by my YouTube channel, Smartbluecat. There's quite a lot there if you want to check it out.
Finally, I'm curious, what other games are interesting you? Have you modded any of those other games? Role-play games? Anything, computer games? I also am wondering, as I asked you earlier, do you do any role-play games, for example, as well?
I don't mod other games. Inigo is my first and only mod. I'm not really a modder. At least I don't think of myself as one. Inigo is a complete anomaly in my life. A lot of games interest me. I'm a massive fan of games in general and what they can accomplish as an art form. If we step away from Bethesda for a bit, because I think pretty much everything that Bethesda does is at least interesting. Some of the other games that are my favorites are classics like the original Deus Ex, the original Thief series, the Half-Life games, the Portal games. I absolutely loved Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. A game that's recently become one of my top favorites is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. That's such a beautiful experience if you haven't played it. It's short, but it's a complete joy from beginning to end. And the tone of it reminds me a lot of Ico, one of my other top gaming experiences of all time. If you haven't checked out either Ico or Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, I suggest you do so immediately. Both of them are just masterpieces.
I reached out to the Skyrim community on Reddit, and they wanted to ask you some questions as well. So here are a few of those questions. This is from Merle Corgi. Hello, Merle. Merle Corgi wants to know, how long did it take you to come up with all the dialogue for Inigo? Did you record in a professional setting or at home? What software and equipment did you use? Was Inigo always going to be purple? Or was he originally a more typical Khajiit color? I know he isn't supposed to fit in 100% with the lore, Merle also wants to know, but if Inigo had one of the Khajiit prefixes, what would he have?
Well, I've already talked about the equipment thing, I think, in an earlier question. As for how long it takes to come up with the dialogue, the lines, really I just think of a subject and it's like taking dictation from Inigo. He's a part of me. He's by far the easiest character I've ever written. In my experience, generally, ideas aren't the hard part. They never are. Everybody's got a million ideas. It's very easy to have an idea. It's very hard to make that idea into reality. Like writing down, oh, it'd be great if you said this, or it'd be funny if you said that. Actually getting the line to carry with the right tone, the right feeling, so the joke or the emotion is conveyed correctly. That's the tough part. That's what takes all the time. That's what takes all the effort. Along with all the stuff I've mentioned earlier about cleaning each track and the rest of it. His prefix would probably be Do, meaning warrior because of his battle prowess. Was he always going to be purple? Well, he isn't really meant to be as purple as he appears in some people's games. He's right on the edge between blue and purple depending on what lighting mods you have installed. In the vanilla game, he's purpley blue or a bluish purple. Why that color, though, I guess is the question. I wanted to make him different, and I've always been fond of colours in that area of the spectrum. My online name has been Smartbluecat since about 2006. So when I realised I was going to make a uniquely coloured Khajiit, I didn't really have to think too long about what kind of colour he should be. There's actually a well-hidden line in the mod that suggests that he started out closer to blue and is growing more mauve as he gets older. This is an idea I reinforce in version 2.0.
Solitude Bliss 18 wanted to know, what is his own favorite follower? And yours, she's referring to you, Gary. What's your own favorite follower, vanilla or modded, other than Inigo?
I'm sure it won't surprise too many Inigo fans to learn that Miol was the first follower I kept around for any length of time. She's tough, she's marked as essential by the game so she can't die, and for whatever reason Bethesda gave her more backstory and dialogue than the majority of other companions, even though she never shuts up. She has a bit more depth than most other vanilla followers. Serana is also very cool, but Miol and I have been through a lot together. I've got a soft spot for Miol, and that's why I gave Inigo a crush on her. She's not quite my cup of tea, but Inigo definitely goes for the Red Sonja type. Unfortunately, when you're creating a mod, it's a bad idea to play with other mods installed, so I really haven't had the chance to test out most of the fantastic custom followers available. That said, when I finally did take a break, I discovered Vilya, and I was absolutely blown away by what that team had accomplished. In fact, it was only after seeing that Vilya had an audience who liked her as much for her personality as for her technical features that I decided to upload Inigo at all. I knew that Inigo could never compete with Vilya on a technical level, but I do think they share a number of similarities, the most important being a strong emphasis on character. Really though, most of the companions that I like are in other games altogether. The wonderful NPCs you meet in Fallout New Vegas, Alex Vance and Dog from Half-Life 2, still such a high benchmark. Some of the characters from Mass Effect. I think Fox from Fallout 3 would get on very well with Inigo. In my mind, they are extremely similar beings.
Random username 815 wanted to know, are there any other follower mods on the horizon, Gary?
Not for a while anyway. I really don't think so. There are a number of new characters that play a big part in Inigo's story that I will be adding. So I'm doing more NPCs, just not more followers. Something like Inigo takes so long that I'd rather focus everything on him than release a bunch of watered down followers that each only have 1,000 lines or so. I really want to make your experience with him as dense and as fleshed out as possible.
Ezrin, over at Reddit, was curious. Do you have any plans on making any other mods after Inigo is complete? Which you may have already answered in a previous question, but will Inigo ever be complete to your satisfaction?
I'm really not thinking that far ahead, to be honest. As Inigo expands, though, it feels like I'm working on multiple mods, even though it's all just him. I'm incorporating custom textures and level design, maps and scenes, and a whole host of new features that are bound to keep me very busy for the foreseeable future. Will Inigo ever be finished? Once his story is complete, that's when I'll be satisfied. That's when I'll be able to step back and go, yeah, he's done. I just need to take it one step at a time.
Dr. Death 89F wanted to know, are you ever going to finish the quest you had planned for Inigo? The one that most likely would have had you, the player, help him, Inigo, retrieve his father's sword.
Yeah, his mother's bow and his father's sword both play a part in his story, but I'm not going to say anything more on that just now. I don't want to give anything away.
Russian Banana was curious to know, Inigo is already considered by many to be the best follower mod. I know that I consider it to be the best follower mod. At this point, I think he just wants to tell more of Inigo's story. Is there a specific goal in mind at this point for you, Gary, telling more of Inigo's story? Also, in the next update, are there going to be more story and more lines from what I understand? That's from Russian Banana. And the last question Russian Banana wanted to know is the potential timetable for other content. Like, for example, when, if ever, might we see Dawnguard or Dragonborn content?
The overall goal is to eventually get Inigo through his personal story in a way that hopefully moves the player emotionally and lets them feel like they've been an active participant along the way. Version 2.0 sets the stage for Inigo's story proper. It contains a lot more information about Inigo. There are also about 1,400 new lines. A lot of these are things I never had time to add in the last update, responses for certain idle actions like mining, enchanting, that kind of thing. There are more places covered, more Mr. Dragonfly stuff, and there's a huge amount of backstory added. I'd love to add DLC content, but to do it justice, it would mean making Inigo require the DLCs to function. So, unfortunately, because I don't want to exclude players who don't own the expansions, the DLC-aware version of Inigo will likely be one of the last things I do. Of course, the DLCs don't break him in any way currently. He just doesn't have any custom awareness for those new areas and situations.
Vaffer Lupus wanted to know, would like to know if Gary is planning on making Inigo marriageable, and if so, how he would pull it off. Now, I know that you, Gary, have already stated, that Inigo is not marriageable. So I felt, a little bit concerned putting this question in here because I'm sure you've been asked it numerous times. But I guess I'd like to know what your thoughts were on making why Inigo is not marriable, and could you ever be persuaded to change that?
Because I'm trying to tell a very specific story, Inigo's entire character is based around being a friend. Being married to him before that story reaches its conclusion would throw up a number of inconsistencies that just aren't worth the trouble. You may be able to marry him at a later date, but really I'm far more interested in creating a tangible bond between him and the player, and that in no way requires the both of you to be married. In fact, being married to him would flat out compromise that bond at a certain stage of his tale. Rather cryptic, I know, but I'm sorry, that's all I can say at this stage.
Running Turtle 1 wanted to know, did Gary have any deleted content or not used content or funny bloopers while he was creating Inigo? Would he upload any funny stuff or mistakes on his YouTube channel related to Inigo? Also, and here's a fun question that Running Turtle 1 wanted to know, Gary, what's your snack of choice? What do you like to snack on?
Most of what I record isn't used in the game. If I'm recording 50 lines in a session, when they're all clumped together, they may take 2 or 3 minutes to play, but the session file itself is usually about an hour and a half or 2 hours long, so the vast majority of what I record never gets used. It's ditched because of noise interference, bad acting, or me endlessly messing up take after take. So there are hundreds of hours of bloopers potentially, but they're mostly very boring and not worth preserving, I'm afraid. I really don't think that 20 very similar takes of the same line would be much fun to listen to for anyone. If anything random but amusing slips out, I do tend to find a place for it in the mod though. In version 2.0, there are a couple of responses that should be outtakes, but they still made sense, so I left them in there. Here's an example. This is what the line should have been.
Ha! First I confuse you, then I kill you.
And here's what I said by mistake.
Ha! First I kill you, then I confuse you. No, wait, the other way around.
Because I stayed in character, the line was still valid, so I ended up keeping both versions. A nice healthy apple is my snack of choice.
Maria Adrian wanted to know, also, if Gary is willing to tell us, please ask him what is his profession or job. He seems to be a Renaissance man to me, a really talented person.
My day job is working at an after-school teaching art. Usually it's only a few hours a day, so it leaves me a lot of time to work on whatever project I'm currently tackling. In the past, I've done a fair amount of freelance art and animation, but I never found that nearly as satisfying as teaching and working on my own ideas.
Ravian Gale wanted to know, will Inigo ever be able to engage in conversation with other NPCs?
Yes, hopefully in the next major update after version 2.0. He currently has quite a bit to say about certain NPCs, but I'm eager to get them chatting properly. It's very high up there on my to-do list.
Lastly, Captain Butter wanted to know, how did you come by the name Inigo?
Yeah, well, he definitely has a bit in common with a certain fictional scarred-faced master swordsman also called Inigo, that I'm sure many of you are aware of. And it's pretty close to indigo, the colour that sits between blue and violet, the shade of his fur. But really, when I first created him in the creation kit, I looked at him and thought, you're obviously called Inigo. Simple as that. I wish I had a more interesting, complex answer, but really that's it. It just seemed right.
It's been a real pleasure getting to sit down and interview you and find out so much more about this fascinating mod. I also want to congratulate you, Gary, on getting GameSpot's Mod of the Year award. That's right, Inigo is the man as far as GameSpot is concerned. And as far as I'm concerned as well. Thanks so much for joining me and the viewers of the Jessa Channel, Gary. Every bit of the success you've earned with Inigo is well deserved. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Jessa. Thanks for all the support. And thanks to everybody out there who plays with Inigo. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much.